the thing that was kind of ironic about President Wilson's 14 points is it all happened 2 months before we even sent soldiers over to Europe. They were still in training with General Pershing. And on January 8th of 1918, President Woodrow Wilson gave a speech to Congress and outlined what we know today as the 14 points. So again, President Wilson's 14 points came into being 2 months before we even send troops over to Europe to fight. And because on January 8th of 1918, President Woodrow Wilson gave a speech to Congress and he outlined a plan that would be known as the 14 points. And what the plan was a plan for world peace. What are we going to do once this world war is over? So it tells you must have some confidence that the American impact on this war is going to make a difference because he's already making plans on what we do afterwards. Okay? Now, his plan for peace had 14, obviously, different points to it. And you can see those in front of you, but I'm just going to put them in layman's terms for you. Points 1 through 5 basically called for 2 things. If you read through points 1 through 5, what he's trying to get across is these are 2 things that need to happen after the war is over. Number 1, the end of secret treaties between nations. That's what kind of got us in trouble in the first place. So points 1 through 5 in layman's terms call for the end of secret treaties between nations. And points 1 through 5 also call for freedom of the seas for all nations in war and peace. No more of this international law, you got to give warning. There'll always be freedom of the seas. You can't attack ships, whether you're in peacetime or wartime. So of the 14 points he outlined, points 1 through 5 called for the end of secret treaties between nations and freedom of the seas for all nations, both in wartime and in peace. Now, if you read through points 6 through 13, what he's doing is he's restructuring Europe after the war is over. And Europe will be different, boundary-wise, etc., after the war ends. It'll be different. So points 6 through 13, if you read through those, basically is a plan to restructure Europe after the war. Restructure Europe after the war. So, points 1 through 5 call for the end of secret treaties between nations and freedom of the seas for all nations in peace and war. Points 6 through 13 outline a plan for the restructuring of Europe after World War I. Point 14 was the most important to him, and point 14 called for a general association of nations, or a League of Nations. And that was the most important point in his mind of the 14 points. Let's form a League of Nations so we can communicate, so we do not have another world war like this. Because he's trying to put a plan together for world peace. So naturally he wants a League of Nations. Do we have a League of Nations today? What do we call it?
UN.
The United Nations. It doesn't piggyback off his at all. Because in the end, his isn't ever going to happen. But he came up with the concept of a general association of nations called the League of Nations, that you could sit down and talk things out before you get yourself in a war. Those are President Wilson's 14 points, and we'll talk later on how well he does on those. So, that's going to take us to our next subtopic, which is World War I on the Western Front. World War I on the Western Front. So, Daniel, you're the Germans. You make up most of what we know as the Central Powers. And you find out that the United States declared war on you, and they're preparing troops right now, preparing troops, sending over supplies and stuff. What does your strategy become in the war? What are you going to do? What's your goal? Once you find out America's entered and they're back in the United States training troops, but they are sending supplies and equipment, what's your goal? What's your strategy?
You're going to start attacking the U.S.
I don't think you want to do that. What's your goal going to be? So all of a sudden, there is 3 new wrestlers in your weight class that are pretty good. And I don't know if they're going to make training. They got to get all their practices in before the state tournament. All of a sudden, we get to the state tournament, and they're not there yet. What's your goal?
Hoping that they didn't get enough practice.
You hoping what?
They didn't get enough
That's
practice.
right. So you're hoping that you can win the state championship in wrestling before these 3 great wrestlers get there, right? That's exactly what Germany's strategy was. We've got to win this war over the Allies before the United States gets men over here fighting. Because once the United States sends men over, it's either going to be tougher to win or it's going to be a pretty long war to win, which means casualties. So the German strategy completely changed after the United States entered the war. Their goal was to try to win the war in Europe before the United States could send troops. And in 1918, there are 2 very important battles fought in France before American troops are prepared to aid Allied troops. And what would be the goal of the Allies in these 2 battles, Daniel? The Allies.
They're trying to hold off the Germans.
They're trying to just at least get a tie so that America has more time to get over here. Okay? Now, the first of these battles occurred on March 21st of 1918. And it was called the Battle of the Somme River. March 21st, 1918, the Battle of the Somme River. And in this particular battle, the Allies fight Germany to a stalemate. They don't lose. They don't necessarily win, but they don't lose. They're not defeated to have to surrender. So they fight the Germans to a stalemate. A couple weeks later, on April 9th of 1918, we have another battle called the Battle of the Lys River. A couple weeks later, on April 9th of 1918, we have another battle, the Battle of the Lys River. And again, what do the Allies do? Fight to a stalemate. They do not lose. They don't necessarily win, but they don't lose to the point they have to surrender. Now that's really important that they have fought to stalemates in the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of the Lys, because it's going to give them more time for American troops to get there. These were key battles on the Western Front. Now, the first battle which involved American soldiers was the Battle of Chateau Thierry. The Battle of Chateau Thierry. And that battle was fought 50 miles from Paris, France. So the first battle of World War I in which American soldiers fought on the side of the Allies was the Battle of Chateau Thierry. And that battle was fought just 50 miles from Paris, France. Now, do you think if they lose Paris, France, the Allies have lost all of France, and more than likely the war? So the Battle of Chateau Thierry is the first battle fought by American soldiers just 50 miles from Paris, France. Now, these American soldiers that fought in this battle were under the command of a French field marshal by the name of Ferdinand Foch. Ferdinand Foch was the man that was in charge of the Allied forces at the Battle of Chateau Thierry. So American forces fought not under General Pershing, but under the command of French Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch. And during this Battle of Chateau Thierry, the Allies pushed the German army completely out of Paris back across the Marne River. And that river had been breached by the Germans earlier. So in the Battle of Chateau Thierry, with American troops helping, French Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch and his troops pushed the Germans out of Paris, France, and back across the Marne River. This was an 8 8-day battle, bloody battle, but it completely changed the course of the war. The Battle of Chateau-Thierry lasted 8 long days, was a bloody battle, but the Allied victory there completely changed the course of the war. It was after this loss that Germany figured we're in trouble. We could lose a lot of men trying to win this conflict, and German morale went down. Okay, their hopes of victory went down. And there were some skirmishes here and there between battles, but the final battle of World War I was fought in September of 1918. Final battle was fought in September of 1918. So when I say the final battle was fought in September of 1918, did the American entrance make a big difference in this war? Absolutely. Now the final battle was called the Battle of Meuse-Argonne. Battle of Meuse-Argonne. And this was another victory for the Allies. Anybody want to guess how many American soldiers fought in this battle? Jonathan, give us a shot. How many American soldiers fought in this battle? 1.2 million. Very good. It's a lot of soldiers, considering that the population of Wyoming is 600,000 approximately. 1.2 million American soldiers fought for the Allies in the Battle of Meuse-Argonne. Final battle of World War I, which takes us to our next subtopic, which is the end of World War I. See, Danny, how fast we're getting through these? The end of World War I. Never judge a subtopic by its color. Never judge a horse by its color. So, after the Battle of Meuse-Argonne, on November 9th of 1918, German Kaiser Wilhelm II, fearing for his own life and the loss of the war, flees Germany. On November 9th, 1918, German Kaiser Wilhelm II, the man who boldly invaded what country? Belgium, on his way to France, fears for his own life and a loss in this war, and he fled from Germany on November 9th, 1918. 2 days later, on November 11th, 1918, a truce was signed ending the Great War. Finally, 2 days later, on November 11th, 1918, a truce was signed ending the Great War. Anybody know when that was signed? On the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. What do we call that today? What holiday is that kind of? What's that called? Armistice Day. Okay? Armistice Day. So, there was no question that the arrival of the United States of America had won the war for the Allies. Anybody want to guess how many troops were killed on both sides during this war? Now, you got to, not just when America got it, from the start to the end. How many troops on both sides were killed? Anybody want to take a shot at that? Now, keep in mind, I'll just give you an example. In the Vietnam War, Americans lost 58,000. Anybody want to guess how many soldiers were killed on both sides in World War I? Throw a guess. What do you think, Daniel?
500,000.
How about 10 million? 10 million men lost their lives, soldiers, during World War I on both sides. 10 million. You know what else suffers during a war? Who else suffers during a war? Civilians. Guess how many civilians were killed? Just people in the wrong place at the wrong time. You want to take a shot on that? 5 million. 5 million civilians killed. 15 million people killed on both sides. That's killing a generation or two. Do you imagine that? 15 million people killed. That takes away generations to come. Wiped out the course of World War I were generations of Europeans. So your question might be, how many Americans were killed? Well, we weren't there that long, but we fought some bloody battles. So KIA means killed in action. 116,516. 116,516 killed in action. Wounded? 204,002. So American casualties in World War I included 116,516 killed in action and 204,002 wounded. Now, do you know how many soldiers served in Europe during World War II? How many went there? How many you guess? How many soldiers do you think we had in Europe? You want to take a shot? Anybody? How about 4,734,991? 4,734,991. Now of that 4,734,991, 3 different branches of the armed services were represented. Who would they be? Army, Navy, and the United States Marines. Which one of those groups made up the biggest number of that 4.7 million and change? What? Army. Let me tell you how many the Army supplied. Out of that 4,734,991, 4,057,101 were from the United States Army. Of the 4,734,991 that fought, 4,057,101 were Army. Navy, 599,051. 599,051. And the men that committed themselves as U.S. Marines, and that number was 78,839. So Army, 4,057,101. Navy, 599,051. And Marines, 78,839. Again, killed in action, 116,516. Wounded, 204,002. So, we didn't lose as many, but think about this. How many names are on the Vietnam Wall? 58,000. This would be twice as many, but the American casualties in World War II aren't even close to this. So, just kind of keep that in mind. Okay, that'll take us to our last subtopic then, which is the Peace Conference in France. Peace Conference in France. Now, on December 4th of 1918, President Wilson left the United States for France. How did he get there, Bailey? How did he get there? What? Bailey, we're going from the United States to France, dear, over the ocean. He went by a boat because flights weren't possible. Okay, flights weren't possible. Now, when he left on December 4th of 1918, when he set sail for France, it would be the first time in American history that a president traveled to Europe. That's kind of hard to believe. It's 1918, and it's the first time in American history that a United States president travels to Europe. We had never had a president travel to Europe in all the years of this country, from 70 we were fighting, but in that first president came out in 17 what? 1776, 1790. We haven't had a president in Europe from 1790 to 1918. Now, Kate, when he got there, how did the people of France react to him? Why would they act good towards him? They were thrilled with him, cheering him. Why? Absolutely saved him from losing the war. He was given accolades and ovations. They thought he was the greatest thing ever. They even referred to him as the great peacemaker from America. He was very, very well received by the French people when he arrived in France. Greeted by huge crowds. Everybody wanted to see him. Ovations, the great peacemaker from America. So why is he going over there? For the peace conference. And when does the peace conference start? January 18th of 1919, which tells you that it took him a while to get there, didn't it? You get on the boat, it isn't there the next day, okay? So he left on December 4th of 1918, and the peace conference began on January 18th of 1919, and the place they met was the Palace of Versailles. They met at the Palace of Versailles. And there would be 4 leaders of countries there to decide the fate of Europe after World War I. 4 countries. And these 4 leaders will be known in history as the Big Four. The Big Four, these 4 leaders that met at the Palace of Versailles in 1919. Who were they? Obviously, President Woodrow Wilson of the United States was one of the Big Four. George Clemenceau from France is one of the Big Four. David Lloyd George of Great Britain is one of the Big Four. And Vittorio Orlando from Italy is part of the Big Four. So you got Wilson of the United States, Clemenceau of France, David Lloyd George of Great Britain, and Vittorio Orlando. Why would somebody from Italy be there? We haven't talked about Italy too much. Why would somebody from Italy be there? Because what are we going to do in this meeting? Point 6 through 13. Come on. You dead today? They're going to reestablish the boundaries of Europe. They're going to reorganize Europe, and Italy's going to be affected. Well,